have status don't have status anymore. And so being willing to be ridiculous.
I would just say to them, you are all the great Achilles whom we knew.
At 10 years old, Stephen Colbert lost everything that made the world feel safe. His father, his brothers, and the innocence of his childhood. For years, the grief stayed buried beneath silence, invisible to everyone around him.
Diplomacy. Yeah. To what level was military action a tool in your arsenal?
But behind the laughter of one of America's greatest comedians was a boy still learning how to survive unimaginable pain. This is the untold story of loss, resilience, and the making of a legend. The boy from Charleston. Stephen Tyrone Colbert was born on May 13, 1964, in Washington, D.C. The 11th and youngest child in a large, tight-knit Catholic family. 11 children. Let that sink in. From the very beginning, Stephen existed at the edge of a crowd. The youngest, the quietest corner of a very loud, very loving household. His father, James William Colbert Jr., was no ordinary man. He was a physician, an immunologist, and an academic dean. Brilliant, accomplished, and deeply devoted to his family. His mother, Lorna Elizabeth Colbert, was the warm, steady anchor who held that enormous household together. The family eventually settled outside Charleston, South Carolina, when his father accepted a prestigious position at the Medical University of South Carolina. And for a while, life was beautiful. Stephen was a curious, imaginative child. He loved books. He loved science. He dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, of diving into the deep ocean, exploring worlds beneath the waves. He was the baby of the family. Loved, protected, surrounded by brothers and sisters who filled every room with noise and life. But that world, that full, vibrant, irreplaceable world, was about to be taken from him. The day everything changed, September 11th, 1974. Stephen Colbert was 10 years old. His father, James, and his two brothers nearest in age, Paul and Peter, boarded Eastern Airlines Flight 212 for a short trip from Charleston to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was supposed to be routine. It never arrived. The plane crashed into a fog-covered hillside, a cornfield just 3 miles from the runway. 72 people perished that day. Among them, Stephen's father, Stephen's brother Paul, Stephen's brother Peter. 3 members of his family, gone. In an instant, Stephen was not on that plane. He was home. And when the news came, he was 10 years old. He later reflected on that moment in one of the most quietly devastating interviews ever recorded, saying he felt as though the center of his love had simply disappeared. Nothing made any sense after my father and my brothers died. I kind of just shut off. Shut off. That is how a 10-year-old boy survives the unsurvivable. He doesn't scream. He doesn't fall apart. He simply goes quiet inside. The youngest of 11 children now found himself spending long, silent days alone with his grieving mother, Lorna, who by any measure is one of the most remarkable women in this story. Because Lorna Colbert did not collapse. She did not surrender to bitterness. She got up every single day. She raised her remaining children, and she modeled for Stephen, without ever saying it in words, that grief and gratitude can coexist. That loss does not have to become poison. Years later, Stephen would honor her on national television, saying, "She knew more than her share of tragedy, but her love for her family and her faith in God somehow gave her the strength not only to go on, but to love life without bitterness." The son was watching. The son was learning. But the wound was sealed shut. The silent years. Grief deferred. Stephen Colbert moved through his teenage years with a peculiar kind of detachment. He wasn't outwardly troubled. He wasn't self-destructive. Not yet. He simply existed in a world that felt fundamentally different from everyone else's. He struggled to connect with peers. How could they possibly understand what lived inside him? There was also a physical blow during these years that redirected his life entirely. As a child, Stephen underwent surgery to remove a tumor from his ear. The procedure, intended to heal him, instead destroyed his eardrum. He became permanently, completely deaf in his right ear. His dream of marine biology, of scuba diving, of exploring the ocean he had always loved, was over. Just like that. 2 losses, 2 dreams, 2 doors slammed shut. He enrolled at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, drifting without direction. Then he transferred to Northwestern University in Chicago to study theater. Not because he was certain it was his calling, but because, in his own words, it was the only thing that felt alive. And then came college, and the grief that had been locked away for nearly a decade came rushing in. He arrived at Northwestern weighing around 185 pounds. By the end of his freshman year, he had dropped to 135. He was dissolving. The loss of his father and brothers, the grief he had never allowed himself to feel, had finally found its way out. Not in tears, not in anger, in absence, in weight falling away, in a young man quietly disappearing into himself. This was the real cost. The bill that had been accumulating since he was 10 years old, finally coming due. Finding comedy. The gift in the wreckage. But something else was happening at Northwestern. Something that would change everything. Stephen discovered improv comedy, and it changed him. In the wild, unpredictable yes-and world of improvisational theater, Stephen Colbert found something he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. There are no scripts in improv. There is no plan. There is only the present moment, which, for a man who had spent years haunted by the past, was nothing short of revolutionary. He trained at Northwestern's theater program where he met future collaborators who would shape his career, including Amy Sedaris, with whom he would later create the cult comedy series Strangers with Candy. He moved to Chicago after graduation. He joined Second City, the legendary improvisational theater company that launched the careers of Bill Murray, Tina Fey, and Steve Carell, among dozens of others. Night after night, Stephen stood on stage. He made people laugh. He found his voice, not in spite of his pain, but because of it. There is a theory among comedians spoken about in quiet green rooms and late-night conversations that the greatest comedy comes from the deepest wounds. Stephen Colbert is proof. Love. The woman who changed everything. In 1990, Stephen Colbert returned to Charleston, his hometown, the city of his childhood, the city of his loss. He was wrestling with a decision. He had been dating someone and she had issued an ultimatum. Commit or walk away. He couldn't commit. He walked away. And in that same week, in the lobby of a Charleston theater during the world premiere of Philip Glass's Hydrogen Jukebox, he saw her, a woman in a black linen dress. Her name was Evelyn McGee. Stephen has said that the moment he laid eyes on her, something clicked. Something deep and certain and completely beyond explanation. Her. That's your wife. That was the thought that crossed his mind. Not a hope, not a wish. A recognition. They talked for 2 hours. They discovered they had grown up in the same city, attended sister schools, shared mutual friends. The world had conspired quietly to bring them together. They began to date, and in October 1993, they were married. But marriage, even to the right person, does not erase old wounds. Shortly after the wedding, as his career remained frustratingly uncertain, Stephen experienced what he would later describe as a nervous breakdown. panic attacks, anxiety so severe he could barely function. His wife would leave for work in the morning. She would return home in the evening, and Stephen would have spent the entire day walking in tight circles around their couch. "You're looking at it," he would tell her when she asked how his day went. He was a man in his late 20s, deeply in love, but trapped in a private war with his own mind. It was Evelyn who held him steady, who showed up, who stayed. 30 years and 3 children later, Madeline, Peter, and John. She is still there. Stephen has said publicly on more than one occasion that Evelyn McGee Colbert is the single greatest thing that ever happened to him. The rise. From Daily Show to Colbert Report. The career that had caused him so much anxiety eventually found its footing. Stephen landed a spot as a correspondent on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And something clicked. His natural intelligence, his gift for deadpan, his ability to inhabit a character completely, all of it fused into something electric on that set. He wasn't just funny, he was surgical. By 2005, Comedy Central gave him his own show, The Colbert Report. For 9 years, Stephen Colbert played one of the most brilliantly sustained satirical characters in television history. A blowhard, right-wing pundit, apparently sincere, endlessly self-important, all while delivering some of the sharpest political commentary on American television. The character allowed him to say things in plain sight that no straight-faced journalist could say. He exposed political hypocrisy not by arguing against it, but by embodying it, turning it inside out. In 2006, he performed at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, in the same room as President George W. Bush, and delivered a speech so devastatingly pointed that the room went silent. He never broke character, not once. It was one of the most audacious acts in modern comedy history. The Colbert Report ran until 2014, and then came the next chapter, the biggest stage of all, The Late Show, a legacy built in prime time. In September 2015, Stephen Colbert took the chair behind the desk of The Late Show on CBS, succeeding the legendary David Letterman, who had held it for over 2 decades. It was, by any measure, one of the most daunting jobs in American television, and Stephen Colbert made it entirely his own. He dropped the character. For the first time in years, audiences saw the real Stephen. Thoughtful, vulnerable, genuinely curious, deeply funny. He interviewed world leaders and Oscar winners. He performed musical numbers and conducted emotional conversations about grief, faith, and fatherhood. He cried on camera. He made the nation cry. Through the political turbulence of the Trump era, through a global pandemic, through personal health crises, including a ruptured appendix that sent him to surgery mid-season, and a diagnosis of benign positional vertigo that left him literally falling over without warning. He showed up, night after night, year after year. The Late Show became the #1 rated late-night program for 9 consecutive seasons. 9 seasons at the top. Not because he was the funniest, not just because he was the sharpest, but because audiences could feel, through the screen, through the jokes, through the occasional break in the voice, that this was a man who had truly lived, who had known real loss, who understood that laughter and grief are not opposites. They are partners. The end and what it means. In July 2025, CBS announced that The Late Show with Stephen Colbert would end its run in May 2026. The network called it a financial decision. But the timing told a different story. Just days before the announcement, Stephen had openly criticized a $16 million settlement made by Paramount, CBS's parent company, with former President Donald Trump. A settlement many viewed as a concession to political pressure. Stephen said on air that the technical legal term for the deal was simply a big fat bribe. Days later, the cancellation was announced. Stephen addressed his audience directly. He told them he had found out the night before. The audience booed. He smiled in that quiet, genuine way he has. "Yeah," he said, "I share your feelings." CBS declared him irreplaceable. So irreplaceable, in fact, that they retired the entire franchise. No replacement, no successor, just silence where a great voice had been. Critics argued, senators questioned. Jon Stewart called it institutional fear. Stephen said the gloves were off. And on May 21st, 2026, after 11 years, thousands of episodes and countless moments that made a nation feel seen, the lights went down at the Ed Sullivan Theater for the last time. It was the end of a show, but it was also the end of an era. Closing. The lesson of Stephen Colbert. There is a line Stephen Colbert said in an interview that has stayed with millions of people since the moment he said it. He was talking about his father, about his brothers, about the plane crash that stole them from him when he was 10 years old. He said he had learned to be grateful, not despite the loss, but for everything that had come after it, for every single thing, including the suffering, including the silence, including the grief he carried for decades before he learned to set it down. He said his mother taught him that. That woman who refused to be bitter, who raised 11 children, who went on. Stephen Colbert went on too. He went on through deafness and poverty and anxiety and panic attacks and heartbreak and health crises and political warfare. He went on, and he made the world laugh while he did it, because here is the truth about Stephen Colbert. He is not funny because life was easy. He is funny because life was hard, and he refused to let that be the final word. That is the legacy. That is the man, not the character, not the host, not the satirist or the Emmy winner or the late night king. Just a boy from Charleston who lost the center of his world at 10 years old and spent the rest of his life building a new one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for more powerful documentaries, untold stories, and deep investigations from around the world. Until next time, keep exploring the truth behind the headlines.